Today we're going to discuss some aspects of everyone's favorite topic, software requirements. And you know, you can actually take the word software out of everything I talk about, and these concepts and issues and practices apply pretty much to any kind of technical or engineering work. I've been interested in requirements for about 25 years, ever since I was a developer in a small group at Kodak in the research laboratories, and we realized we just had to do a better job of understanding our customers and their needs and how to meet those needs, and so we started trying to find ways to deal with requirements issues. And over the years, I've learned a lot of techniques about that, some things that work and some things that don't work so well. And I've also found that there are a lot of traps, a lot of pitfalls that people run into. So what I'm going to do today is describe 10 of the common problem areas that afflict the requirements activities on many projects. I'm sure many of these things have happened to you. In fact, you might want to make a note as we go along of whether or not you look like you've been caught in or are showing symptoms of being caught in some of these traps, because that might give you an opportunity to extricate yourself from the trap before you get in too deep and maybe headed off at the pass. So for each of these traps, I'm going to describe to you some of the symptoms that suggest maybe that's going to be a problem area for you, but also describe, at least briefly, some solutions that will give you ways of maybe avoiding the problem or getting out of it if it's already pounding you on your project. This is the way a lot of people just look at the requirements process. Perhaps you've seen a cartoon like this. The manager says, I'll go up and find out what they need, and the rest of you start coding. Now, some people have suggested that the guy really ought to be saying, now that you're finished coding, I'll go up and find out what they need. And that doesn't work very well either. I showed this cartoon at a company some years ago, and somebody said, wow, this would be a lot better than what we do. And I found that quite frightening, because I think we all know that this doesn't work very well. So we're not going to talk about this approach. We're going to talk about some other ways that people can avoid getting caught in some of the common requirements problems. And I find that every discussion about requirements begins with confusion about what the word even means. When I hear people talk about the requirements, then I realize that we have different ideas of exactly what kind of information we're talking about, where it comes from, what we're going to do with it, how to represent it, and so we have problems right off the bat with terminology. So here are some of the symptoms that maybe that's been a problem in your organization. People talk about the word requirements, and they don't have any adjectives in front. They're not discriminating one kind of requirements information from another. And this is a problem. I could show each one of you, right now it looks like there's about 260 people listening here. I could show each one of you the same requirement statement, and you're going to call it lots of different things. Somebody might say, oh, that's a functional requirement. No, it's a software requirement, a user requirement, a business requirement, a technical requirement, a system requirement, a feature, a story, a constraint. A lot of different terms that people would use to describe the same piece of knowledge. So I think we need to reach some understanding of what those definitions are at the very beginning here. Sometimes the project sponsor or some other high-level person of interest, maybe the person with the checkbook, presents just a high-level concept of what they're trying to accomplish, and they say, well, here are your requirements. And that's one kind of information, but it's not enough for people to know what to build. At the other end of the abstraction scale, sometimes people sketch out screens. This used to happen to me all the time at Kodak. People would come to me and say, oh, could you write some software for me? Here, I've drawn out some screens of what I want. And those are the requirements. Well, is that really? It sounds to me like it's a solution with a lot of kind of implied requirements knowledge hiding behind it. So we need to try to say, all right, well, if this is what you think will help you solve your problem, what really is the problem? And we need to have some other conversation about what the requirements are. Or we find another symptom is that you work with some users and they give you what they think are their requirements, and the developers say, well, okay, I understand what you said, but I'm still not sure exactly what to build. A question I always keep in mind when someone's talking about requirements is, how do I know when we're done? How will we agree when we're done? That's the kind of information that we need to get to make sure that we're pointed in the same direction and headed toward the same objective. A very common situation I see, and I have reviewed over the last 15 or 20 years probably hundreds of requirements documents for various clients. It's one of the services I provide. And I have found that the vast majority of these documents focus just on describing the functionality, that people want to end up with in the final product. And that's kind of natural. It's what people think of as requirements, and that's pretty important, that that's going to be the bulk of the document. But there's other kinds of information. There's a lot of applications that maybe meet their functional expectations, but they run too slow, or they crash a lot. I've got a situation like that now. I like to write and record music, and I use some music software for scoring, for actually writing the scores. And this is incredibly feature-rich. The software I use has got an amazing amount of functionality in it, but the usability is horrible, and it's just absolutely riddled with bugs, so it's extremely frustrating to use. So just meeting the functional needs is nowhere near sufficient. So we need to come up with some kind of common set of definitions. And I ran into this actually literally just last week. A tool vendor who has a new tool to help you develop and manage requirements for software projects wanted to give me a demo. So we did an online demo, and it's a very impressive product. But at one point in the presentation, they talked about, well, okay, we've got business requirements and user requirements and system requirements. So those are good adjectives, and I use those as well. But I stopped them and said, okay, what do you mean when you say business requirements, user requirements, system requirements? And their definitions weren't the same as my definitions in every case. And so just at the very beginning of a conversation among people who are interested in this topic, we had some confusion and disconnect regarding the vocabulary. So if you're encountering these kinds of problems, let's think about how we could come up with some better definitions that will help us agree on things. So I want to spend a couple of minutes here and describe to you a little model that I've come up with to try to address this issue. I think in terms of three levels of software requirements that I'm going to show you here, but I should point out a useful saying. The saying is that all models are wrong, some models are useful. I think that's absolutely correct, and it's certainly true here. This model is not complete. There's other things that we might want to add to it. And also, this is not universal truth. These are not absolute definitions, but it's a set of definitions that I find helpful and consistent, so hopefully you will as well. I like to start at the top level of abstraction with what I call business requirements. Business requirements kind of answer the question, why are we undertaking this project? And that's an important piece of information. And one place we might capture that is in something called a vision and scope document. You might have another name for this kind of document. It might be a project charter. That's fine. But we need some place where we can communicate the intent from a business point of view of what we're trying to accomplish, because all of the work we do on the project should be aligned with achieving that outcome. And that's a great starting point, but it's not enough information for developers to know what to build. So we need to go down to another level, which I call the user requirements. So just as the business requirements were a kind of why information, why are we undertaking this project, the user requirements are a kind of what information. What will the users be able to do with the product? And a good technique for describing user requirements in many situations is in the form of use cases or stories. You know, there are other terms that are used. Now, let me point out that things like a vision and scope document, a use case document, and so forth really don't have to be traditional natural language documents. They're really just containers for information, and you can put that information in a lot of different forms. I'll call them documents because that's what most people are still doing, but there are a lot of other ways you could do that besides just whipping up Microsoft Word and filling out some template, although that's not a bad starting point. So use cases are great. I think they work well for many projects. They aren't as useful for every kind of project, but they're certainly a very powerful tool. And I've seen many cases where people have given use cases to developers and basically said, call me when you're done. And that has never worked. The reason that doesn't work is because there's not enough information in most use case descriptions for developers to know exactly what to build. So we need to go down to the next level of abstraction, which is the functional requirements. So this is what I think